ache that had settled in her chest. Around her, the small station bustled with purposeful movement. Families reuniting, merchants loading wagons, cowboys heading toward destinations known only to them. Everyone belonged somewhere, was going somewhere, was wanted by someone. Everyone except her. She read the letter again, though she'd already memorized every cruel word. The paper was fine quality, the handwriting educated and precise. Mr. Gerald Thornton of Silver Creek had been meticulous in his correspondence over the past 3 months, his letters filled with practical details about his mercantile business, his modest home, his need for a sensible wife. Not once had he mentioned love or affection, which had suited Evelyn perfectly. She'd learned long ago not to hope for such luxuries. What she hadn't expected was this: rejection before she'd even stepped off the train. Rejection delivered by his attorney, not even the man himself. "Miss, you all right there?" Evelyn looked up to find the station master watching her with concern. He was older, weathered, with kind eyes that had probably seen countless stories play out on this platform. "Yes," she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just waiting." He nodded slowly, clearly unconvinced. "Train back east doesn't leave until tomorrow afternoon. If you need somewhere to stay, Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house about 2 blocks north. Clean rooms, fair prices. Tomorrow afternoon." The words settled over her like a shroud. Return to Boston. Return to her cousin's house where she was tolerated rather than welcomed, where every meal came with the unspoken reminder of her dependence, her failure to secure her own future, her complete and utter expendability. "Thank you," Evelyn managed, though she had no idea how she'd pay for even a single night's lodging. The money Mr. Thornton had sent for her journey was nearly depleted, and her pride, that stubborn, foolish thing, prevented her from wiring her cousin for help. The station master tipped his hat and moved on, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts and her shame. She'd been so careful in her letters to Mr. Thornton. She'd been honest about her circumstances, orphaned at 12, raised by distant relatives who viewed her as an obligation, educated enough to be useful but not so accomplished as to threaten. She'd described herself accurately: plain-featured, practical, healthy, capable of managing a household. She'd asked for nothing beyond basic security and had offered diligent work in return. Apparently even that modest proposal had been too much. "That's a very sad face." Evelyn startled at the small voice. A little girl stood before her, perhaps 7 years old, with wild dark curls escaping from beneath a worn hat and eyes the color of mountain lakes in summer. Her dress was clean but much mended, and she clutched a rag doll with fierce affection. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said, attempting a smile. "I didn't mean to look sad." "But you are sad," the child said, with the brutal honesty unique to the young. "I can tell. When Papa's sad, he gets that same look, like he's seen something far away that hurts to remember." Something about the girl's directness pierced through Evelyn's careful composure. "I suppose I am a bit sad, but I'll be all right." The girl tilted her head, considering this. "That's what Papa always says too, but sometimes I think grown-ups lie about being all right, because they think it's better than telling the truth." She climbed onto the bench beside Evelyn without invitation, settling her doll in her lap. "I'm Maggie, Maggie Hale. What's your name?" "Evelyn?" "Evelyn Carter." "That's a pretty name, much prettier than mine. Maggie sounds like an old mule." Despite everything, Evelyn felt a genuine smile tug at her lips. "I think Maggie is a lovely name, strong and honest." The girl beamed at this. "Are you waiting for someone? Papa and I just delivered supplies to town. He's over at the freight office arguing about prices again. He always argues about prices, but Mr. Peterson always wins because Papa's not very good at arguing." "I'm not waiting for anyone," Evelyn said quietly. "Not anymore." Maggie's bright expression dimmed with understanding beyond her years. "Oh, someone was supposed to come, but they didn't?" "Something like that." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching a wagon loaded with lumber rumble past. The driver called out a greeting to someone across the street, his voice warm with familiarity. This was a community, Evelyn realized, a place where people knew each other, helped each other, belonged to one another. She would never be part of it. My mama died, Maggie said suddenly, her voice matter-of-fact in the way children spoke of tragedies they'd learned to carry. 2 years ago, when the fever came through. Lots of people died that winter, but Mama dying was the worst because she was ours, you know? Papa says she was the heart of our house, and without a heart, things just don't work right. Evelyn's own grief rose to meet the child's loss. I'm so sorry, Maggie. That must have been terribly hard. It was. Still is sometimes. Papa tries his best, but he doesn't know how to do girl things. Like braiding hair. He's awful at it. And he makes the same 3 meals over and over because those are the only ones Mama taught him before she got too sick to teach him anymore. Maggie swung her legs, her worn boots scraping against the bench. He gets real lonely. I can tell even though he doesn't say so. You're very observant. That's what Mrs. Brennan says. She's our neighbor. She says I notice things other folks miss. Maggie turned to look at Evelyn directly, her gaze surprisingly penetrating. Like how you keep touching that letter, but you don't really want to hold it. And how you're sitting like you're trying not to take up too much space, like maybe if you make yourself small enough, bad things won't notice you. Evelyn's breath caught. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. I had a letter today, too, Evelyn admitted, surprised at her own candor. It said I wasn't wanted after all. Maggie's face scrunched up in indignation. That's a mean letter. Who sends a letter like that? Someone who changed his mind. Well, he sounds like a stupid person. Papa says people who change their minds about promises are the worst kind because promises are supposed to mean something. Your papa sounds like a wise man. He is, most of the time anyway, except when he's being stubborn about asking for help. Maggie studied Evelyn with that uncomfortably direct gaze again. Were you going to marry the person who sent the mean letter? Evelyn nodded, unable to trust her voice. Good thing you didn't, then. If he's the kind of person who writes mean letters, he probably would have been a mean husband, too. Mama always said you can tell what kind of person someone is by how they treat people when they don't have to be nice. Sounds like this man didn't even try to be nice. The simple logic was oddly comforting. You're very wise for someone so young. That's because I listen when grown-ups talk. They say things they think children don't understand, but I understand most of it. Maggie kicked her heels against the bench thoughtfully. So what are you going to do now? It was the question Evelyn had been avoiding since opening that letter. I suppose I'll return home. Where's home? Boston, with my cousin and her family. Do they love you there? The question, asked with such innocent directness, hit harder than any amount of adult sympathy could have. Evelyn found she couldn't lie to those clear, curious eyes. No, she said softly. They tolerate me because family duty requires it, but they don't love me. Maggie's face fell. That's the saddest thing I've heard in a long time. Everybody should have somebody who loves them. Even our barn cats have each other. Before Evelyn could respond, a man's voice called across the platform. Maggie, what have I told you about wandering off? Evelyn looked up to see a tall figure striding toward them, and her first thought was that he looked exactly like what she imagined when someone said the word cowboy. He was lean and rangy, with shoulders broadened by hard work and hands that showed the calluses of constant labor. Dark hair touched with early silver at the temples, a face weathered by sun and wind, and eyes that held both weariness and warmth as they fixed on the little girl. I didn't wander, Papa. I'm right here. I was just talking to Miss Evelyn because she looked sad, and it's not right to let people be sad all alone. The man, Maggie's father, reached the bench and his expression softened slightly as he looked at his daughter. We've talked about bothering strangers, Magpie. She's not a stranger anymore. She's Miss Evelyn Carter from Boston, and someone sent her a mean letter saying she wasn't wanted, and now she has to go back to cousins who don't love her, which is just about the worst thing I can think of. Maggie delivered this summary with the confidence of someone reporting undeniable facts. Evelyn felt her face flush hot with embarrassment as the man's attention shifted fully to her. His eyes were gray, she noticed, the color of storm clouds gathering over mountains, and they held a sharp intelligence that made her feel suddenly exposed. Maggie, he said quietly, that's private business. But it's not fair, Papa. Miss Evelyn came all this way to marry someone, and he didn't even have the decency. He sent a lawyer letter. That's just cowardly. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I apologize for my daughter's directness. She means well, but she hasn't quite mastered the concept of discretion. It's all right, Evelyn said, though her voice shook slightly. She was very kind to keep me company. He studied her for a long moment, and Evelyn had the unsettling sensation of being carefully assessed. Not judged precisely, but evaluated with the practiced eye of someone used to making quick determinations about people and situations. Thomas Hale, he said finally, offering his hand. And you've already met my daughter, apparently. His handshake was firm and warm, his palm rough with work. Evelyn Carter. I'm sorry we met under such irregular circumstances. You were meant to marry Gerald Thornton. It wasn't a question, and Evelyn felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over her. You know him? Know of him. Runs the mercantile in Silver Creek. Thomas's expression hardened. He's a particular man, fastidious about appearance and reputation. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. And you weren't what he expected. Evelyn lifted her chin slightly, summoning what remained of her dignity. He had every right to change his mind. The arrangement was... It was conditional on both parties finding the match suitable. The arrangement, Thomas said, his voice carrying an edge, should have included the basic courtesy of a face-to-face conversation before making such a decision. Leaving you stranded at a train station with a letter from his attorney isn't just unsuitable, it's reprehensible. The unexpected defense of her situation caught Evelyn off guard. She'd spent the past hour convincing herself that Mr. Thornton's rejection was somehow her fault, that if she'd only been different, prettier, more accomplished, less obviously desperate, things might have worked out differently. Papa's right, Maggie chimed in. That was a rotten thing to do. Even when I don't want to do my chores, I tell Papa to his face. I don't send Mrs. Brennan over with a note. Despite the awfulness of her situation, Evelyn found herself fighting back a smile. That does seem like the more honest approach. Thomas looked between his daughter and Evelyn, something shifting in his expression. You have family back east? Someone expecting you? Cousins. They're not expecting me. I was meant to stay here, but they'll take me back in. She paused. Eventually. Do you have funds for lodging tonight? The question was asked gently, but it still stung. Evelyn straightened her spine. I'll manage. That's not an answer. Papa, Maggie tugged at her father's sleeve. Papa, I have an idea. Magpie, now's not the time. But it's a good idea. A really good idea. Maggie turned to Evelyn with an expression of such earnest hopefulness that Evelyn's heart clenched. You could come stay with us, just for a little while until you figure out what to do. We have an extra room. It used to be the sewing room when Mama was alive, but nobody uses it now. And Papa could use help with the ranch, and I could use someone who knows how to do girl things, and you could use a place that's not with cousins who don't love you. See? It's perfect. Maggie. Thomas's voice carried a warning note. You can't just invite people to live with us. Why not? You're always saying we could use an extra pair of hands, especially now that the winter work is coming. And Miss Evelyn needs somewhere to go. It's just sensible, Papa. Sensible like you're always telling me to be. Evelyn stood quickly, her face burning. I couldn't possibly impose. It's not imposing if we invite you, Maggie insisted. That's what invitations are for. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that spoke of a man frequently outmaneuvered by his own daughter. Maggie, we don't know Miss Carter. She doesn't know us. We can't just what? Be kind? You said Mama always believed in helping people who needed help. You said that was one of the most important things about her, that she saw people who were hurting and she did something about it instead of just feeling sorry for them. The words hit their mark. Thomas's expression shifted through several emotions, grief, resignation, and something that might have been pride in his too-wise daughter. That's not fair, Magpie. It's not unfair either. It's just true. They stood in an oddly suspended moment, the three of them, while the life of the station continued around them. Evelyn knew she should politely decline, should gather what remained of her dignity and find that boarding house the station master had mentioned. But something in Maggie's hopeful face and Thomas's conflicted expression held her frozen. "I don't need charity," Evelyn said quietly. "I may not have much, but I have my pride." "It wouldn't be charity," Thomas said slowly, as if the words were forming even as he spoke them. "The ranch is a lot for one man to handle, especially heading into winter. And Maggie's right that she needs what I can't give her. Female guidance, proper teaching in things I don't know how to teach." "You want to hire me?" "I'm suggesting an arrangement. Room and board in exchange for help with the house and the child. Nothing permanent. Just until you've had time to make proper plans." He paused, then added with careful emphasis, "Plans that you choose, not ones forced on you by circumstance." It was the last phrase that did it. Plans that she chose. When had Evelyn Carter ever been allowed to choose anything for herself? "I don't want you to feel obligated," she said, even as hope began to flicker dangerously in her chest. "Your daughter is kind, but kindness isn't reason enough for such an offer." Thomas glanced at Maggie, then back at Evelyn. "My daughter is a good judge of character, better than I am, honestly. If she thinks you're worth helping, I'm inclined to trust her judgment." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable but determined. "And speaking practically, I do need the help. Winter's coming fast and there's preserving to do, repairs to make, 1,000 tasks I'm behind on because I'm one person trying to do the work of two." "I can work hard," Evelyn heard herself say. "I'm not afraid of labor." "I don't doubt it. Anyone willing to travel halfway across the country for a chance at a better life has courage enough for ranch work." Maggie bounced on her toes, sensing victory. "So she can come?" "Really?" Thomas looked at Evelyn with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The offer stands, Miss Carter. No obligations beyond honest work. You can leave whenever you choose, though I'd appreciate notice enough to make other arrangements." "And if I prove unsuitable? If you change your mind as Mr. Thornton did?" The question came out more bitter than she'd intended, but Thomas didn't flinch from it. "Then I'll tell you to your face, with enough warning and enough pay, that you can make your own choices about what comes next. I won't leave you stranded." His gray eyes held hers steadily. "You have my word on that." It was the steadiness that convinced her. That, and the small hand that slipped into hers as Maggie looked up with such transparent hope that Evelyn couldn't bear to crush it. "All right," she said softly. "I accept. With gratitude." Maggie let out a whoop of joy that turned heads across the platform. Thomas allowed himself a small smile, though his eyes remained serious as he picked up Evelyn's carpetbag. "The wagon's this way. We'll stop by Henderson's so you can send word to your family that you won't be returning just yet." As they walked across the platform, Evelyn caught sight of her reflection in the station window. She looked the same as she had an hour ago, plain, unremarkable, easy to overlook. But something felt different. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was walking towards something instead of away from something. It wasn't much. It might not last. But it was hers, chosen freely in a moment when she'd thought all choices had been stripped away. The hail wagon was sturdy but worn, its bed filled with various supplies and tools. Thomas helped her up to the bench seat with the same quiet courtesy he'd shown throughout their conversation, then lifted Maggie up after her before climbing up himself and taking the reins. As they rolled away from the station, Evelyn allowed herself one glance back at the platform, where her life had seemed to end just an hour before. Then she turned her face forward, toward the mountains rising in the distance, and the unknown future that waited somewhere beyond them. Beside her, Maggie chattered happily about the ranch and the animals and the room that would be Evelyn's. Thomas drove in silence, his attention on the horses and the rutted road that led out of town. But once, Evelyn caught him looking at her with an expression of cautious curiosity, as if he too was wondering what he'd set in motion with his impulsive offer. The boarding house was exactly as the station master had described: clean, modest, respectable. Mrs. Henderson, a round woman with shrewd eyes and a kind mouth, accepted Thomas's explanation that Miss Carter would be staying at the Hale Ranch without visible judgment, though Evelyn saw the speculative look the woman gave her. "You'll be safe enough there," Mrs. Henderson said, as she provided paper and pen for Evelyn's telegram. "Thomas Hale's a good man. Lost his wife tragic young, but he's raised that little girl right. Works hard, keeps his word, doesn't drink or gamble or carry on. You could do worse for an employer. I'm very fortunate, Evelyn said, and meant it. The telegram to her cousins was brief. Plans changed. Have secured employment in Colorado. Will write with details. Evelyn. She paid for it with coins that left her purse nearly empty and tried not to think about how tenuous her situation really was. Back in the wagon, the town fell away behind them as they headed into open country. The landscape was unlike anything Evelyn had ever seen. Vast and austere, with mountains that seemed to scrape the sky and plains that stretched endlessly in all directions. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way that made Boston's tame parks and manicured gardens seem like pale imitations of nature. "It's so big," she whispered, almost to herself. "Takes getting used to," Thomas said. "Some people find it lonely, all that space with nothing to fill it but wind and weather. I think I like it. There's something honest about it. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is." He glanced at her with what might have been approval. "That's a good way to look at it. The land here doesn't suffer fools or false promises. It just is, and you either learn to live with it or you don't last long." They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds, the creak of the wagon and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. Maggie had fallen asleep against Evelyn's side, her small body warm and trusting. Evelyn found herself instinctively adjusting to hold the child more securely, and when she looked up, she found Thomas watching with an unreadable expression. "She doesn't take to strangers easily," he said quietly. "Not since her mother passed. You must have made quite an impression." "She's easy to talk to. She doesn't judge." "No, she doesn't. Sometimes I think she understands more about people than most adults ever do." He paused. "She's been asking for a mother for the better part of a year now. I keep telling her it's not that simple, but she's got it fixed in her head that every family needs a mama." Evelyn felt a flutter of concern. "Mr. Hale, if this arrangement is about finding your daughter a mother—" "It's not." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "I'm not in the market for a wife, Miss Carter. I loved my Sarah, and what we had, that's not something I'm looking to replace. This truly is about needing help with the ranch and giving Maggie what I can't provide on my own. Nothing more." The clarity should have been reassuring. Instead, Evelyn felt a small, irrational pang of something that might have been disappointment. She pushed it aside firmly. She was done with foolish hopes and romantic notions. A position of honest employment was far more than she'd had any right to expect this morning. "I understand, and I appreciate your candor." The ranch appeared gradually, first as a dark cluster of buildings against the vast landscape, then resolving into details as they drew closer. The main house was simple but well built, with a wide porch and smoke curling from the chimney. A barn stood to one side, solid and practical, and Evelyn could see several other structures, what might be a chicken coop, a storage shed, a small bunkhouse. It wasn't grand, but it was clearly maintained with care. Even in the fading light, Evelyn could see that Thomas Hale took pride in his home. "It's lovely," she said, and meant it. "It's work," Thomas said, but she heard the affection beneath the gruff words. "Always something that needs fixing or tending or building. But it's ours, and it's good land. We do all right." He pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down, then reached up to take Maggie from Evelyn's arms. The child stirred but didn't wake, her head nestling against her father's shoulder with the ease of long habit. Thomas carried her toward the house, leaving Evelyn to climb down on her own and retrieve her carpetbag. The interior of the house was dim and cool, furnished simply but comfortably. Evelyn had a quick impression of worn rugs, solid furniture, and surfaces that were clean but showed the evidence of neglect, dust gathering in corners, dishes stacked by the sink, mending piled in a basket that had clearly been ignored for some time. Thomas carried Maggie to what must be her room, and Evelyn stood uncertainly in the main room, suddenly aware that she was in a strange man's home with nothing but a verbal agreement and her own desperate need for somewhere to belong. When Thomas returned, he seemed to sense her discomfort. He kept his distance, his manner carefully professional. "The room's this way. It's small, but it's private, and it's got a decent bed and a window that catches the morning sun. Sarah used to sew in there back when—" He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "Anyway, it's yours now." He led her down a short hallway and opened a door. The room beyond was indeed small, but it was clean and bright, even in the evening dimness. A simple bed stood against one wall, a dresser against another, and a chair sat by the window. A faded quilt covered the bed, and Evelyn recognized it as the kind of handiwork that spoke of love and patience. "It's perfect," she said softly. Thomas set her bag on the bed. "I'll let you settle in. There's water in the pitcher there, and extra blankets in the chest if you need them. I'll get supper started. Nothing fancy, I'm afraid. Just beans and cornbread. Can I help?" He looked surprised. "You just got here. Take some time to—" "I'd rather help, if you don't mind. I'm not used to sitting idle, and I'd like to start earning my keep." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or approval. "All right, then. Give me 10 minutes to get things started, then come on out to the kitchen." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Evelyn stood in the center of the small room and slowly let out the breath she'd been holding. Then, because she was finally, truly alone, she allowed herself to cry. They weren't tears of despair, though grief and relief were certainly part of the mix. Mostly, they were tears of release, all the fear and shame and uncertainty of the day pouring out of her in shuddering waves. She cried for the girl she'd been this morning, so full of cautious hope. She cried for the future she'd imagined with Mr. Thornton, modest and loveless, but at least secure. And she cried for this unexpected present, this strange kindness from strangers, this slim chance at something she couldn't even name yet. When the tears finally stopped, Evelyn washed her face in the basin, smoothed her hair, and squared her shoulders. Then she went to help make supper, taking her first real step into her new, uncertain, terrifying, hopeful life. The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and coffee. Simple and honest scents that somehow made Evelyn's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Thomas stood at the stove, his back to her, as he stirred something in a heavy iron pot. He'd removed his hat, and in the lamplight his hair showed more silver than she'd noticed before, threaded through the dark like frost on winter grass. "There's an apron hanging by the door if you want it," he said without turning around. "And the cornbread needs mixing. Flour's in the tin there, and the recipe's in Sarah's book on the shelf. Fair warning, my daughter will tell you I can't make cornbread worth a damn, and she's not wrong." Evelyn found the apron and tied it around her waist, the fabric worn soft from years of use. Sarah's apron, she realized. Sarah's kitchen. Sarah's husband and child and home. She was walking into the shape of a life that had been violently interrupted, trying to fill a space that had been carved out by love and loss. The thought should have paralyzed her. Instead, it steadied her hands as she reached for the recipe book. The handwriting inside was neat and cheerful, with little notes in the margins. "Thomas likes extra honey in this one. Maggie won't eat if there's too much pepper. Best when served warm with butter. A whole marriage, a whole motherhood, documented in small domestic observations." Evelyn felt like an intruder reading them, but she read them anyway, learning what she could about the people who had offered her shelter. "She was a good cook," Thomas said quietly. "Better than me by a country mile. I've been trying to follow her recipes, but somehow they never turn out quite right. Missing some ingredient I can't name." "Love, probably," Evelyn said, then immediately wished she could take the words back. Too presumptuous, too familiar. But Thomas just nodded slowly. "Yeah, probably that." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds, the bubble of beans on the stove and the scrape of Evelyn's spoon against the mixing bowl. It was strange how quickly the rhythm established itself, Thomas checking the beans, Evelyn preparing the cornbread, both of them moving around the small kitchen with careful awareness of the other's presence. "How long have you been managing alone?" Evelyn asked as she poured the batter into a pan. 2 years, near enough. Sarah took sick in the winter of '88. By spring, she was gone." His voice was matter-of-fact, but his shoulders tensed. "Fever swept through half the territory that year. Took young and old alike, didn't seem to matter how strong you were or how careful. Sarah nursed half the valley through it before it took her down. I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry. Doesn't change anything." He said it without bitterness, just stating a fact. "First year after, I was just trying to keep Maggie fed and the ranch from falling apart. Second year, I realized we were surviving, but not really living. That's when I started thinking maybe we needed help. Maybe I needed to swallow my pride and admit I can't do it all. Evelyn slid the cornbread into the oven. Pride can be expensive. That it can. You learned that the hard way too? She thought of all the times she'd refused help from her cousins, all the small humiliations she'd endured rather than admit she needed anything. Yes, I suppose I did. Thomas turned to look at her properly, leaning back against the counter. Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business if you want. All right. Why Colorado? Why agree to marry a man you'd never met and move halfway across the country to do it? Evelyn had been asked variations of this question before, by her cousin's wife who thought her insane, by the other mail-order brides on the train who'd been full of romantic notions about adventure and true love. But somehow Thomas's question felt different. He genuinely wanted to understand, not to judge. Because I was 23 years old and completely dependent on the charity of relatives who resented my existence, she said, the honesty coming easier than she'd expected. Because every day in that house was a reminder that I had no real purpose, no real value. Because Mr. Thornton offered me a trade that seemed fair, my work and companionship in exchange for security and a place to belong. It wasn't romantic, but it was honest. Or I thought it was. Until it wasn't. Until it wasn't, she agreed. Though I suppose I should be grateful he changed his mind before the wedding rather than after. Thomas made a sound that might have been agreement or disgust. Gerald Thornton's a fool. Whatever he thought he wanted, he's not going to find it in a mail-order catalog. Perhaps he realized that. Perhaps he's too particular for his own good. Man's nearly 40, never been married, runs that mercantile like it's a military operation. Everything in its place, everything just so. I heard he once made a customer leave because they tracked mud on his clean floor. Thomas shook his head. Some people get so caught up in having everything perfect, they forget to actually live. Evelyn absorbed this, trying to reconcile the meticulous letter writer she'd corresponded with against this picture of rigid perfectionism. He never mentioned being particular in his letters. Just practical. There's practical, and then there's impossible to please. Thornton's the latter. Thomas pulled the beans off the stove. His loss is our gain, I suppose, though I imagine that's small comfort. It's more comfort than you might think. This morning I thought I'd lost my only chance at an independent life. Now I have work and a place to stay and people who actually wanted me here, even if it's just for practical reasons. That's not small. Something flickered across Thomas's face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. You've got a good way of looking at things, Miss Carter. Finding the hope in hard situations. It's either that or drown in self-pity. I've tried both. Hope's harder, but more useful. A small sound from the doorway made them both turn. Maggie stood there in her nightgown, rubbing sleep from her eyes and looking uncertain in a way she hadn't at the train station. I thought maybe I dreamed it, she said softly. That you came home with us. Evelyn's heart clenched at the vulnerability in the child's voice. Not a dream. I'm really here. Maggie's face split into a grin that transformed her whole expression. Good. I'm glad. Are we having supper? I'm starving. We are indeed, Magpie. Go wash up. The meal was simple but satisfying, eaten at a scarred wooden table that had clearly hosted countless family dinners. Maggie chattered through most of it, telling Evelyn about the ranch and the animals and the school she attended in town 3 days a week. Thomas ate quietly, occasionally correcting his daughter's more exaggerated claims or adding practical details she forgot. Evelyn watched them together and saw the deep bond beneath the easy banter. The way Thomas cut Maggie's cornbread without being asked, the way Maggie automatically passed him the butter before he reached for it. Small intimacies of long familiarity, the kind that came from being each other's whole world for 2 years. She was the outsider here, the stranger trying to find her footing in an established dynamic. But neither Thomas nor Maggie seemed to hold that against her. They made space at the table, in the conversation, in the comfortable silences between topics. After supper, Maggie insisted on showing Evelyn the barn and introducing her to all the animals. Thomas followed at a distance, ostensibly to finish evening chores, but clearly also keeping watch over his daughter's enthusiastic tour. That's Buttercup, Maggie said, pointing to a brown and white cow. She's sweet, but she kicks if you come up on her left side too quick. And that's Daisy, And that's Marigold. Mama named all the cows after flowers because she said it was silly to name something you might have to eat someday after anything too personal. Evelyn couldn't help but smile at this logic. Your mother sounds like she was very practical. She was. Papa says I got my practical side from her, but I think I got it from both of them. Maggie moved to the next stall. These are the horses, Thunder and Lightning, and Papa says those are ridiculous names for plow horses, but Mama let me name them when I was little, and now we're stuck with it. I think they're fine names, Evelyn said, reaching out to stroke Lightning's velvety nose. You're good with horses, Thomas observed from where he was forking hay into the stalls. A lot of city folk are nervous around them. My uncle kept horses before he died. I used to help in the stables when I was young. The memory was bittersweet, one of the few good ones from her childhood. I liked the work. The horses didn't care if you were orphaned or awkward or poor. They just cared if you were kind and competent. Horses are good judges of character, Thomas said. Better than most people. Maggie yawned hugely, and Thomas set aside his pitchfork. All right, Magpie, time for bed. You've talked Miss Carter's ear off enough for one day. But I have so much more to show her. And it'll all still be here tomorrow. Come on now. The evening routine was clearly established. Maggie changed into her nightgown, Thomas helped her with her buttons. Evelyn stood awkwardly to the side until Maggie grabbed her hand and pulled her along to hear bedtime prayers. They knelt beside the narrow bed, and Maggie's prayer was simple and earnest. Thank you for bringing Miss Evelyn to us, and please help her not to be sad about the mean letter man. And please let her stay a long time because I really like her, and I think Papa does too, even though he's being all quiet and proper about it. Amen. Maggie, Thomas said with weary exasperation, but Evelyn saw the corner of his mouth twitch. What? It's true. You do like her. You let her use Mama's apron. Thomas's ears went slightly red. That's because it was the only apron, and bed, now, before you say anything else embarrassing. Maggie climbed under the covers, but her eyes were still bright with mischief. Will you tell me a story, Miss Evelyn? Papa's stories are all about cows and weather and crops, which are very boring. My stories are practical, Thomas protested. They're boring practical, Maggie insisted. Miss Evelyn, do you know any good stories? Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, thinking. I know a few. Do you like adventure stories? Yes, with brave girls who do things. So Evelyn told her a story about a girl who sailed across an ocean to find her fortune, improvising details and watching Maggie's eyes grow heavy as the tale unwound. By the time the fictional girl reached the new land and discovered her real treasure was the courage she'd found along the way, Maggie was fast asleep. Evelyn stood carefully and found Thomas watching from the doorway with an expression she couldn't quite read. That was kind of you, he said quietly as they left the room, pulling the door almost closed. She's easy to be kind to. They stood in the hallway, suddenly awkward now that Maggie's chatter wasn't there to fill the silence. Thomas cleared his throat. I should explain the household arrangements. I'll be honest, Miss Carter, I've never done this before. Never had anyone living here who wasn't family. So if I'm too formal or not formal enough, you'll have to forgive me while I figure out the right balance. I understand. I've never been in this position either. Your room locks from the inside. You should use it, not because He stopped, clearly uncomfortable. I'm not suggesting you need protection from me. Just that a woman living in a house with a man she doesn't know should have privacy and security. And boundaries. Clear boundaries. His discomfort was oddly reassuring. A man with predatory intentions wouldn't be this concerned with propriety. I appreciate that, and I'll do my best to help without overstepping. This is still your home, your routine. I'm just here to assist, not to take over. Sarah's things, Thomas said abruptly. The apron, the recipes, the sewing room, I haven't been able to clear them out. Probably should have before you came, but I couldn't quite manage it. If it bothers you, using her things, I can— It doesn't bother me, Evelyn said gently. If anything, I'm honored to use them. She clearly loved this family very much. Thomas's jaw worked for a moment. She did. More than anything. When she was dying, she made me promise to make sure Maggie remembered her, not just as a name or a grave, but as a real person who loved her. I've been trying to keep that promise. You're doing well. Maggie talks about her mother with love, not just grief. That's rare. Is it? I wouldn't know. My own mother died when I was too young to really remember her. He rubbed the back of his neck. Anyway, thank you. For coming, for helping, for being good to Maggie. I know this isn't what you with more grace than most would. Most people haven't had as much practice at adjusting expectations, Evelyn said with more honesty than she'd intended. Thomas looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, really looked at her, and Evelyn had the unsettling feeling of being seen in a way she usually wasn't. Not judged, but witnessed. I think Gerald Thornton's a damn fool, he said quietly, and I think we're lucky you ended up on our doorstep instead of his. Before Evelyn could respond, he'd turned and headed for the front door. I need to check the stock one more time before bed. Make yourself at home, Miss Carter. Kitchen's yours if you want tea or anything. I'll see you in the morning. He was gone before she could find words, leaving her alone in the dim hallway with her heart beating faster than it should. She returned to her small room and prepared for bed, her movements automatic while her mind spun through the events of the impossible day. This morning she'd been rejected, stranded, certain her life was over before it had really begun. Tonight she was in a stranger's home wearing a dead woman's nightgown, responsible for a child who'd already claimed a piece of her heart, working for a man who looked at her like she might actually matter. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was nothing at all like what she'd planned. Evelyn climbed into bed and pulled Sarah's quilt up to her chin, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Somewhere outside, Thomas was making his final rounds. Down the hall, Maggie slept peacefully, trusting in tomorrow with the confidence of a child who'd been shown that she was loved. And here, in this small room that smelled faintly of lavender and dust, Evelyn Carter lay awake, wondering if maybe, just maybe, being unwanted by Gerald Thornton was the best thing that had ever happened to her. The days that followed established a rhythm that felt both foreign and oddly natural. Evelyn rose with the sun, drawn from sleep by the sound of Thomas moving around the kitchen and the lowing of cattle in the morning mist. She'd dress quickly, braid her hair, and join him for coffee before Maggie woke. Those early morning hours became her favorite time. Thomas was quieter in the mornings, more contemplative, and he seemed to appreciate that Evelyn didn't feel the need to fill every silence with chatter. They'd sit at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around warm mugs, and watch the sun paint the mountains pink and gold. Sometimes he'd mention tasks that needed doing, preserving vegetables from the garden, mending harnesses, cleaning the chicken coop. Sometimes he'd just comment on the weather or the livestock or nothing at all. Evelyn found herself learning to read his silences, understanding that the set of his shoulders meant he was worried about money, that the way he stared into his coffee meant he was thinking about Sarah, that the slight softening around his eyes meant he was pleased about something even if he didn't say so. "You don't talk much in the mornings," she observed one day, about a week into her stay. "Neither do you. I appreciate it." Most people seem to think silence is uncomfortable, something to be filled. Thomas looked at her over the rim of his mug. Most people are afraid of their own thoughts. Silence makes them confront things they'd rather avoid. And you're not afraid. Didn't say that, but I've learned you can't outrun your thoughts. Might as well sit with them, uncomfortable or not. It was the most philosophical thing she'd heard him say, and it gave her a glimpse of the man beneath the practical rancher, someone who thought deeply, felt deeply, but kept it carefully contained. Maggie would tumble into the kitchen around then, still sleepy but determined to help with breakfast. She'd taken to shadowing Evelyn constantly, chattering away about everything and nothing while Evelyn taught her how to make biscuits or darn socks or feed the chickens properly. "You're good with her," Thomas said one afternoon, watching from the barn door as Evelyn showed Maggie how to groom the horses. "Patient. Sarah was like that too, never got frustrated even when Maggie asked the same question 17 times. She's bright. She just wants to understand how things work. She wants to understand everything. It's exhausting sometimes." But he said it with such obvious affection that Evelyn smiled. Better than a child who doesn't care about anything. True enough. He joined them in the barn, and together they worked through the afternoon chores. Evelyn was learning the rhythms of ranch life, the constant cycle of feeding and mucking and mending, the way everything depended on everything else, the 1,000 small tasks that kept the whole enterprise running. It was hard work, harder than anything she'd done in Boston, but she found she didn't mind. There was something satisfying about ending each day with tangible evidence of what you'd accomplished. Clean stalls, fed animals, preserved vegetables lined up in neat rows, mended clothes folded and put away. "You're not afraid of work," Thomas said one evening as they finished repairing a section of fence. "I half expected you to last 3 days before deciding this wasn't what you'd signed up for." "I didn't sign up for anything," Evelyn reminded him. "This was your daughter's impulsive invitation and your reluctant acceptance of it." "Fair point, but you could have declined. Could have found somewhere else to go." "I could have, but I didn't want to." He studied her in that direct way he had, as if trying to understand something that puzzled him. "Why not?" Evelyn considered the question seriously. "Because in Boston, I was useful but not valued. Here I feel like I'm both. Your daughter genuinely wants me around, not because I'm obligated to be there, but because she enjoys my company. You need my help, which means my contribution matters. That's not something I've had before." Thomas nodded slowly. "I can understand that. Feeling like you matter. You matter to Maggie. Surely you know that. I'm her father. I'm supposed to matter to her. That's different from choosing to value someone because of who they are, not what they're obligated to be to you." It was remarkably similar to what Evelyn herself had said, and the parallel hung between them, acknowledged but not examined too closely. The second Sunday after Evelyn's arrival, Thomas announced they'd be going to town for church. Evelyn's stomach knotted at the thought. She'd be introduced to the community as the Hale family's hired help, the woman who'd come to marry Gerald Thornton and ended up working for his competitor's widow instead. The gossip would be inevitable. "You don't have to come if you don't want to," Thomas said, reading her hesitation accurately. "I know it'll be awkward." "Will it be worse for you if I stay home? People assuming things?" "People will assume things regardless. They always do." He shrugged. "But I'd rather they assume things based on the truth than on absence. You're working for me honorably. Nothing to hide." So Evelyn wore her best dress, which was still plain and slightly worn, and climbed into the wagon with Maggie bouncing excitedly beside her. The church was a simple white building on the edge of town, and as they approached, Evelyn saw curious faces turning their direction. The whispers started immediately. She heard fragments as they walked toward the entrance. "That's her. Poor thing. Wonder what she did wrong. Thornton must have had good reason." Thomas's hand landed gently on her elbow, his touch brief but steadying. "Hold your head up, Miss Carter. You've got nothing to be ashamed of." So she lifted her chin and walked into that church like she had every right to be there, which she supposed she did. The service passed in a blur of hymns and prayers, and a sermon about the Good Samaritan that felt pointed enough to make Evelyn wonder if the pastor knew her story. Afterward, the real trial began. People clustered around, their curiosity thinly veiled behind polite inquiries. Mrs. Brennan, the neighbor Maggie had mentioned, approached with kind eyes and a knowing smile. "So you're the young lady who's been helping Thomas with the ranch. Maggie hasn't stopped talking about you." "Miss Carter's been a blessing," Thomas said firmly, before anyone else could jump in. "Don't know how I managed before she came." "Well, we're glad to have you in the valley," Mrs. Brennan said warmly. "And don't pay any mind to the gossips. They'll find something new to chew on soon enough." But not everyone was so kind. Evelyn felt the weight of judgmental stares, heard the whispered speculation about why Mr. Thornton had rejected her, what her real character must be like. One woman, dressed in expensive fabrics with an air of self-importance, approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Carter, is it? I'm Mrs. Thornton, Gerald's sister-in-law. I do hope there are no hard feelings about the change in plans. Gerald has very particular standards, you understand. He's hoping for someone more refined." The casual cruelty took Evelyn's breath away. Before she could formulate a response, Thomas stepped forward. "Your brother-in-law's standards apparently don't include basic courtesy or keeping his word. Miss Carter's refinement is evident in how she's handled his shabby treatment with dignity, which is more grace than he deserves." His voice was cold and precise. "Now, if you'll excuse us, ma'am, we have work to get back to." He guided Evelyn and Maggie toward the wagon, his hand firm and protective on Evelyn's back. Maggie, who'd heard every word, looked up with fierce indignation. "That lady was mean. I don't like her. Neither do I, Magpie. Neither do I. They drove home in silence, Evelyn struggling with the hot shame of public judgment and the unexpected warmth of Thomas's defense. He'd stood up for her without hesitation, made it clear that her value wasn't determined by Gerald Thornton's rejection. "Thank you," she said quietly as they pulled into the ranch, "for what you said to that woman. I meant every word. The Thorntons are a proud family, and they confuse wealth with worth. You're worth 10 of them, Miss Carter, and don't let anyone tell you different." Later that evening, after Maggie was asleep, Evelyn found Thomas on the porch, staring out at the darkening mountains. She joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cooling air. "I've been thinking about what Mrs. Thornton said," she began. "Don't. She's not worth your thoughts." "Maybe not, but she made me realize something." Evelyn took a breath. "I spent so much time trying to make myself acceptable to Gerald Thornton. I wrote careful letters, presented myself as exactly what I thought he wanted, and it still wasn't enough. But here, I haven't tried to be anything other than myself, and somehow that's been acceptable. More than acceptable." Thomas turned to look at her. "Being yourself is all anyone should ever ask of you." "That's a lovely sentiment, but the world doesn't usually work that way." "No, it doesn't. But maybe it should, at least in the small corners we can control." He paused. "You fit here, Miss Carter. Not because you're trying to fit, but because you just do. Maggie adores you. The work gets done better with you here, and I—" He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "I appreciate having another adult to talk to. Someone who understands that life isn't simple, and people aren't perfect, and sometimes the best you can do is just keep going." "I appreciate that too," Evelyn said softly. "More than you know." They stood together in the gathering darkness, not touching, but somehow connected, two people who'd both learned that life rarely went according to plan, but could still offer unexpected grace. And in that moment, standing on a porch in the Colorado wilderness under a sky full of stars, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. Not the desperate hope she'd carried to meet Gerald Thornton, but something quieter and more solid. A sense that perhaps she'd finally found a place where being herself, imperfect, uncertain, but genuinely trying, might actually be enough. The following weeks brought the first real cold, the kind that crept in during the night and left frost patterns on the windows by morning. Evelyn would wake to find her breath misting in the air and the water in the wash basin filmed with ice. But the kitchen was always warm when she emerged, Thomas already up and stoking the fire, coffee brewing on the stove. "Winter comes fast here," he said one morning, watching her wrap her shawl tighter. "One day it's autumn, next day you're waking up to snow. We need to get the rest of the preserving done this week, and there's wood to split and stack before the real storms hit. Tell me what needs doing, and I'll do it." He looked at her with something that might have been admiration. "You don't hesitate, do you? Just dive straight in." "Hesitation never got me anywhere. Action at least gives you a chance." They worked together that day, processing the last of the garden vegetables, standing side by side at the kitchen table. Thomas chopped while Evelyn prepared the jars, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. Maggie sat in the corner practicing her letters, occasionally looking up to ask questions or share observations that had nothing to do with anything. "Miss Evelyn, do you think clouds get tired of being clouds? Like maybe sometimes they want to be something else?" "I think clouds are content being clouds," Evelyn said, smiling. "They get to travel everywhere and see everything. But they can't hold anything. Everything just falls right through them." Thomas glanced up from his chopping. "Where does she come up with these things?" "She's observant," Evelyn said. "She notices what other people miss." "She notices too much sometimes. Asked me last week if I was lonely. What kind of question is that for a 7-year-old to ask?" "An honest one." "Were you?" Thomas's knife stilled for a moment. "Yes, but I told her I had her, so I couldn't be too lonely." "And what did she say?" "She said having people around doesn't mean you're not lonely. Said you can be lonely right in the middle of a crowd if the people around you don't really see you." He resumed chopping, his movements precise and controlled. "Sometimes I forget she's only 7. She thinks like someone much older. Loss does that to children, makes them grow up faster than they should." "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Evelyn carefully wiped the rim of a jar before sealing it. I was 12 when my parents died. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I went from being a cherished daughter to being a burden overnight. You learn quickly to read situations, to make yourself useful, to stay small and quiet so people don't resent you quite as much. Thomas had stopped chopping entirely now, his full attention on her. That's no way for a child to live. No, it isn't. But it's the way many children do live. At least I had relatives willing to take me in. Some aren't that fortunate. Willing isn't the same as loving. No, Evelyn agreed quietly. It isn't. They finished the preserving in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, heavier, weighted with shared understanding. When the last jar was sealed and the kitchen cleaned, Thomas touched her elbow lightly. For what it's worth, you're not a burden here. He seemed to struggle for words. You're part of things now, part of the rhythm of this place. It would feel wrong if you weren't here. The words settled around Evelyn's heart like a warm blanket. Thank you. That means more than you probably realize. Maggie chose that moment to announce she was bored with letters and wanted to go feed the chickens. The intensity of the moment broke, replaced by the practical demands of ranch life, but something had shifted between Evelyn and Thomas. Some acknowledgement of connection that went beyond employer and employee, beyond the practical arrangement they'd agreed to. That night, after Maggie was asleep, Evelyn sat in the kitchen mending one of Thomas's shirts. The fabric was worn soft from years of washing, the tear along the shoulder seam evidence of hard use. She worked carefully, her stitches small and even, repairing what could be saved. Thomas came in from his evening check of the stock, bringing cold air and the scent of hay with him. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her, watching her hands move. You don't have to do that. I can manage my own mending. I know, but I'm here, and I'm capable, and this way it's done. She glanced up at him. Unless you'd prefer I didn't touch your things. No, He rubbed his jaw, looking uncomfortable. I'm not used to being taken care of. It feels strange. Good strange or bad strange? Jury's still out, but there was warmth in his eyes that suggested he knew the answer already. They fell into comfortable quiet, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the whisper of needle through cloth. Evelyn found herself intensely aware of Thomas's presence, the way he cradled his coffee cup, the tired set of his shoulders, the silver catching lamplight in his hair. Can I ask you something? Thomas said suddenly. Of course. Do you ever regret it? Coming here, I mean. Taking a chance on strangers when you could have gone back to something familiar. Evelyn considered the question seriously. I regret that Gerald Thornton led me to believe I was wanted when I wasn't. I regret the humiliation of being rejected sight unseen. But coming here? Working with you and Maggie? No, I don't regret that at all. Even though it's harder than you expected? The work, the isolation, the gossip in town? The work is honest and the isolation is peaceful. As for the gossip, I've been gossiped about my whole life. At least here I know what I'm being judged for. She tied off her thread and cut it cleanly. Besides, I'd rather be here doing hard work that matters than in Boston, being decorative and useless. Thomas smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. I don't think you could be decorative and useless if you tried. It's not in your nature. No, I suppose it isn't. She folded the mended shirt and set it aside. What about you? Do you regret letting Maggie talk you into this arrangement? I regret that I needed help at all, that I couldn't manage on my own. He paused. But I don't regret you being here. You're good for Maggie, good for the ranch, and if I'm being honest, good for me too. It's nice to have adult conversation that isn't about cattle prices or weather patterns. You have neighbors. Mrs. Brennan seems friendly. Mrs. Brennan is wonderful, but she's also got her own family and concerns. And the other ranchers, well, we help each other when needed, but we're not exactly the philosophical conversation type. He looked at her directly. You're different. You think about things. You notice things. You're easy to talk to. Evelyn felt warmth spread through her chest. You're easy to talk to as well. You listen more than you speak, which makes your words carry more weight when you do share them. Sarah used to say I was too quiet, that I kept everything bottled up inside until it festered. Were you too quiet with her? Probably. I'm not good at talking about feelings, never have been. He stared into his coffee. I think that's why her death hit me so hard. All the things I never said, never expressed, and then she was gone and it was too late. Evelyn's heart ached for him. I'm sure she knew you loved her. Knowing and hearing are different things. She deserved to hear it more than she did. He set down his cup with deliberate care. I'm trying to be better about that. With Maggie, especially. Making sure she knows she's loved, not just assuming she'll figure it out. She knows. Anyone can see that when they watch you together. I hope so. God, I hope so. He looked up at Evelyn, his gray eyes shadowed with old grief and new concern. I don't want her growing up feeling like you did, like she's only tolerated, only valued for what she can do rather than who she is. She won't. You're too aware of that danger, which means you'll protect her from it. They sat in silence for a while longer, the intimacy of the late hour and the quiet house wrapping around them. Evelyn realized with some surprise that she was completely comfortable here, sitting with this man who'd been a stranger just weeks ago. There was no pressure to perform or impress, no anxiety about saying the wrong thing or being judged for her thoughts. I should let you get to bed, Thomas said eventually. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. That fence in the south pasture won't repair itself. I can help with that. It's rough work, cold work. I'm not afraid of either. He smiled again, that rare expression that made something flutter in Evelyn's chest. No, you're not. All right then, we'll tackle it together. The fence repair took most of the next day, and Thomas was right. It was rough, cold work. The wind bit through Evelyn's coat, and her fingers went numb despite her gloves, but she worked alongside Thomas without complaint, holding posts steady while he drove them in, stretching wire while he secured it. You're tougher than you look, he said at one point, pausing to catch his breath. I'll take that as a compliment. It is one. Plenty of ranch-born women wouldn't work this hard in this cold. You're city-raised, and you're out here working like you've done it all your life. Necessity is a good teacher, and stubbornness helps. He laughed, the sound surprising in its warmth. That it does. They finished as the sun was setting, painting the snow-dusted mountains in shades of rose and gold. Evelyn stood for a moment just looking, struck by the wild beauty of the landscape. In Boston, beauty was cultivated and controlled, manicured gardens and carefully designed parks. Here, beauty was raw and untamed, indifferent to human preference. It never gets old, Thomas said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Watching the sun set over those mountains. Sarah and I used to stand right here, end of the day, and just watch. She said it was nature's way of reminding us that no matter how hard the day was, there was still beauty in the world. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Too wise to die so young, but I suppose wisdom doesn't protect you from fever any more than anything else does. Evelyn wanted to reach for his hand, to offer comfort through touch, but she wasn't sure if that would be welcome. Instead, she said, I think she'd be glad you're carrying on, making sure Maggie has a good life, keeping the ranch running, honoring what you built together by not letting it fall apart. Thomas's throat worked for a moment. I hope you're right. Some days I feel like I'm barely holding things together, like I'm one bad season away from losing everything. But you haven't lost it. You're still here, still fighting. That counts for something. Does it? Sometimes I wonder if I'm just being stubborn, if it would be smarter to sell, move somewhere easier, give Maggie a different kind of life. Do you want that? A different life? He thought about it, his gaze still on the mountains. No. This land, this ranch, it's in my blood now. Sarah and I built something here, and I want Maggie to have it. Want her to know where she comes from, what her parents worked for. But wanting something and being able to keep it aren't always the same thing. You'll keep it, Evelyn said with conviction she didn't entirely understand. Because you're not alone anymore. Because Maggie needs you to. Because you're stronger than you think you are. He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. How do you do that? How do you manage to say exactly what someone needs to hear? I don't know that I do. I just say what I think is true. Well, your truth is... He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. It's valuable, more than you probably realize. They walked back to the house together as darkness fell, their shoulders occasionally brushing with the easy familiarity of people who'd worked side by side all day. Inside, Maggie had attempted to start dinner and had created a cheerful disaster in the kitchen. "I was trying to help," she said, looking slightly guilty at the flour dusting every surface. "But the biscuits exploded." "Biscuits don't explode, Magpie," Thomas said, but his tone was amused rather than angry. "These ones did. They went all puffy and then they just sort of burst." Evelyn surveyed the damage and bit back a smile. "Did you remember to add the baking powder?" "I added something. It was white and powdery." "How much?" A lot?" Thomas and Evelyn exchanged looks, and then they were both laughing, the kind of helpless laughter that came from exhaustion and absurdity, and the simple joy of being alive despite everything. Maggie looked between them, bewildered at first, then joining in because her father's laughter was rare enough to be precious. They cleaned up the kitchen together, all three of them, and made a simple supper of soup and bread. After Maggie went to bed, Evelyn found herself once again sitting with Thomas in the quiet kitchen, but this time there was a different quality to the silence, something charged, expectant. "Evelyn," Thomas said, using her first name for the first time, "can I be honest with you about something?" Her heart rate picked up. "Of course. When Maggie first suggested you come stay with us, I thought it was a terrible idea. A stranger in my house, in Sarah's space, disrupting the life we'd built. I agreed because I was desperate and because my daughter has a way of seeing things more clearly than I do. But I expected to regret it." Evelyn's chest tightened. "And do you regret it?" "No, that's what I'm trying to say." He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "I don't regret it at all. In fact, I can't imagine how we managed before you came. You've made this house feel like a home again instead of just a place we exist in. You've given Maggie someone to talk to and learn from, and you've given me—" He stopped, and Evelyn found herself leaning forward too, drawn by the intensity in his voice. "You've given me hope," he finished quietly. "Hope that life doesn't have to be just about surviving, that there can be small joys and good conversation, and someone who understands without needing everything explained. I didn't think I'd feel that again." Evelyn's throat was tight with emotion. "Thomas, I'm not saying this to make you uncomfortable," he continued quickly. "I know our arrangement is professional. I know you're here because you needed somewhere to go and I needed help. I'm not asking for anything to change. I just wanted you to know that you matter here, not just as help, but as yourself." "You matter to me too," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I expected. More than might be wise, given the circumstances." The confession hung between them, honest and dangerous. Thomas's eyes darkened, and for a moment Evelyn thought he might reach across the table, might close the distance between them, but he didn't. Instead, he stood abruptly. "I should check the stock, make sure everything's secure for the night." It was an excuse, and they both knew it, but Evelyn didn't call him on it. Some things needed time to settle, to be examined in the privacy of one's own thoughts before they could be faced head-on. "Of course. I'll see you in the morning." He left quickly, and Evelyn sat alone in the kitchen, her heart racing and her mind spinning. What was happening here? What was this growing connection between them? And more importantly, what should she do about it? The next few days brought a careful dance of proximity and distance. Thomas was unfailingly polite, but slightly more reserved, as if he'd frightened himself with his honesty and was trying to re-establish proper boundaries. Evelyn followed his lead, keeping things professional even as her awareness of him seemed to intensify with each passing hour. But Maggie, oblivious to the undercurrents, continued to bind them together with her innocent demands. She wanted Evelyn to teach her sewing, which meant sitting close together by lamplight while Thomas worked on ranch accounts nearby. She wanted family dinners where they all talked about their days. She wanted bedtime stories that both adults participated in, taking turns creating adventures for fictional characters. "You're like a real family," Maggie said one evening, her voice drowsy with approaching sleep. "Like how it was before Mama died. Not exactly the same, but good anyway." After she fell asleep, Thomas walked Evelyn back to the kitchen, his expression troubled. "She's getting attached," he said. "Maybe too attached. Is that a bad thing?" "It could be. If this doesn't last." If you decide to leave, or if circumstances change. He ran a hand through his hair. I don't want her heart broken again. She's already lost one mother. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. I'm not trying to be her mother, Thomas. I know my place here. Do you? Because I'm not sure I do anymore. He looked at her with something that might have been frustration or longing or both. This was supposed to be simple, a business arrangement, but nothing about this feels simple anymore. What do you want it to be? Evelyn asked, her courage surprising her. I don't know. That's the problem. I don't know what I want, and even if I did, I don't know if I have the right to want it. Sarah's only been gone 2 years. Is that long enough? Is there a proper mourning period before you're allowed to feel something for someone else? I think Sarah would want you to be happy. Wanting me happy and wanting me to replace her aren't the same thing. I'm not trying to replace her, Evelyn said firmly. I couldn't even if I wanted to. She was Maggie's mother, your wife. She built this life with you. She struggled for words. I'm just here, trying to help, trying to be useful, trying not to hope for more than I have any right to hope for. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. And what are you hoping for, Evelyn? The question was almost unbearably intimate. Evelyn thought about lying, about deflecting, about protecting herself, but she was so tired of being careful, of hiding what she felt for fear of rejection. I'm hoping, she said slowly, that maybe being here could become more than temporary. That maybe I could build a real life here, with you and Maggie. Not as Sarah's replacement, but as myself. As someone who cares about both of you more than is probably sensible. Thomas's eyes opened, and the look in them made Evelyn's breath catch. That's what I'm hoping for too, and it terrifies me. Why? Because what if I'm wrong? What if this is just loneliness talking, or convenience, or desperation? What if I'm putting my needs ahead of what's right for Maggie? What if... He stopped, swallowed hard. What if I let myself care and then lose you too? I don't think I could survive that again. Evelyn stepped closer, drawn by his raw honesty. Life doesn't come with guarantees, Thomas. We could both walk away right now and still lose everything tomorrow. A fever, an accident, any number of tragedies. We can't protect ourselves from loss by refusing to feel anything. I know that. Logically, I know that. But knowing and doing are different things. Yes, they are. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and rested her hand on his arm. So what do we do? He looked down at her hand, then up at her face. We take it slow. We're honest with each other. We protect Maggie as best we can, and we see where this goes without forcing it to be anything it's not ready to be. I can do that. Can you? Even if slow is really slow, even if I need time to figure out what I'm feeling and why. I've waited my whole life to feel like I belong somewhere, Evelyn said softly. I can wait a little longer to know if this is that place. Thomas lifted his hand and covered hers where it rested on his arm. His palm was warm and rough, his touch gentle despite the calluses. You already belong here, Evelyn. The question isn't whether you have a place, it's what that place looks like. They stood like that for a long moment, connected by touch and understanding, the kitchen warm around them and the rest of the world very far away. Then Thomas squeezed her hand gently and stepped back. We should get some sleep. Morning comes early. It always does. But as Evelyn lay in bed that night, she found sleep elusive. Her mind kept returning to the conversation, to the careful admission of feeling, to the promise of possibility. Nothing was certain, nothing was guaranteed. But for the first time in her life, Evelyn felt like she was moving towards something rather than away from something. And that, she thought as she finally drifted off, made all the difference. The first snow came 3 days later, transforming the ranch into something from a fairy tale. Evelyn woke to an unfamiliar brightness filtering through her window and found the world outside blanketed in white, pristine, and silent. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where Thomas was already layering on extra clothing. Storm's coming, he said without preamble. Real one, not just flurries. We need to get the livestock secured and extra feed moved closer to the barn. Could be days before we can get out there again. They worked through the morning in companionable efficiency, their earlier conversation creating a new awareness between them, but not awkwardness. If anything, the honesty had made things easier. They knew where they stood now, even if that place was uncertain and evolving. Maggie was thrilled by the snow, insisting on helping despite the cold. She chattered constantly as they worked, making up elaborate stories about snow fairies and winter magic, until even Thomas smiled at her imagination. "She gets that from Sarah," he said, as they hauled hay into the barn. "The storytelling, the make-believe. I'm too practical for that kind of thinking." "Maggie has both of you in her," Evelyn observed. "Your practicality keeps her grounded, but Sarah's imagination lets her fly. She's lucky to have gotten the best of both." Thomas paused, a bale of hay in his arms. "I never thought of it that way. I've been so worried about what she lost that I forgot to see what she still has." By early afternoon, the wind had picked up and the snow was falling in earnest. Thomas insisted they all stay inside, and Maggie celebrated by declaring it a perfect day for baking. She pulled out Sarah's recipe book with reverent care and flipped to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "Mama's sugar cookies," she announced. "She always made them on the first big snow. Said it made the house smell like Christmas even when Christmas was months away." Evelyn saw Thomas's face tighten with old grief, but he nodded. "That's a fine idea, Magpie. Miss Evelyn, you up for teaching her?" "Of course. Though I should warn you, my cookie-making skills are adequate at best." "Mama said the secret is in the rolling," Maggie said seriously, reading from the notes in the margin. "Not too thin or they burn, not too thick or they're doughy. Just right, like everything in life should be." They spent the afternoon in the warm kitchen, flour dusting every surface as Maggie learned to roll and cut while Evelyn supervised and Thomas pretended to work on accounts but mostly just watched. The cookies weren't perfect, some too thin, some misshapen, but they filled the house with the scent of butter and sugar and vanilla. "Mama would like this," Maggie said softly as she decorated a slightly lopsided star. "She'd like that you're here, Miss Evelyn. Teaching me things, making Papa smile more. He doesn't think I notice, but I do. He's different now. Better different." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I'm glad. But your Papa was always wonderful. He just needed help carrying the weight." "That's what families do, right? Help carry the weight?" The question was so innocent, so hopeful, that Evelyn had to turn away to hide the sudden tears in her eyes. When she looked up, she found Thomas watching her with an expression that held understanding and something that might have been longing. That night, after Maggie was asleep and the storm howled outside, Thomas and Evelyn sat by the fire with mugs of tea. The wind rattled the windows and snow piled against the walls, but inside was warm and safe. "Days like this make you grateful for solid walls and a good roof," Thomas said. "And company. Sarah and I weathered plenty of storms like this, but they were never lonely. We'd sit just like this, talking or reading or just being together. After she died, the storms felt different, colder somehow, even when the fire was just as warm." "And now?" Evelyn asked gently. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "Now it feels less cold. Having you here, having another person to share the silence with, it matters more than I can say. I'm glad I'm here too. Even with the storm, even with the cold, maybe especially because of them. They make the warmth mean more." Thomas was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Evelyn, I need to tell you something about why Gerald Thornton rejected you." Evelyn felt her stomach clench. "You don't have to. I do. Because you deserve to know it had nothing to do with your worth." He set down his cup and leaned forward. "I heard from Mrs. Brennan, who heard from her sister, who heard from someone in Silver Creek. Thornton saw you at the station. He was there, watching from the mercantile across the street, and he decided you weren't what he wanted before you even stepped off the train." The words hit like a physical blow. "He saw me? And sent his attorney with that letter anyway?" "Yes, and according to what Mrs. Brennan heard, it was because you looked too plain, too ordinary. He wanted someone who would enhance his social standing, make his business look more prosperous. He wanted decoration, not partnership." Evelyn sat very still, absorbing this. The humiliation of it burned fresh and sharp, but underneath was something else. Anger, maybe, or relief. "So it was never about me at all," she said slowly. "Not about my letters or my character or anything I could have controlled. Just about how I looked in a travel-worn dress after 2 days on a train. Just about his own shallow priorities and his cowardice in not even having the decency to face you himself. Thomas's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. I wanted you to know because you've been carrying this like it was your fault, your failure, but it wasn't. It was his. Thank you for telling me, even though it hurts to hear. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's better than believing a lie about yourself. He paused. You're not plain, Evelyn. You're not ordinary. You're strong and capable and kind. You're beautiful in ways that matter, in the way you treat Maggie with such gentle patience, in the way you work without complaint, in the way you find hope in hard situations. Thornton's a fool who can't see past surface appearances to recognize quality when it's standing right in front of him. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. You don't have to say that just to make me feel better. I'm not. I'm saying it because it's true, and because someone should have said it to you long before now. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. You deserve to be valued, Evelyn, really valued, for exactly who you are. She held his hand tightly, drawing strength from his certainty when her own felt shaken. I don't know what I did to deserve finding you and Maggie, but I'm grateful for it every single day. The universe has a strange sense of justice sometimes, takes away with one hand and gives with the other. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, the gesture absent and intimate. I lost Sarah, which nearly destroyed me. But if she hadn't died, you wouldn't be here. And I'm starting to think that maybe both things can be true. That losing her was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and finding you might be one of the best. The confession hung between them, honest and raw. Evelyn squeezed his hand, unable to find words adequate to the moment. So they sat in silence, hands linked, while the storm raged outside and the fire burned low, and something fragile and precious grew in the warm space between them. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping them all inside in a cocoon of forced proximity. But rather than creating tension, it seemed to deepen the bonds forming between them. They fell into easy rhythms, cooking together, teaching Maggie her lessons, reading aloud in the evenings, sharing stories of their different pasts. Evelyn learned that Thomas had been raised on this very ranch by parents who'd homesteaded the land when it was still wild territory, that he'd met Sarah at a church social and known within 10 minutes that he wanted to marry her, that he'd been terrified of fatherhood but had fallen completely in love with Maggie the moment she was born. Thomas learned that Evelyn's parents had been educated and kind but not wealthy, that her father had been a school teacher with a love of literature, that she'd grown up in a house full of books and music, and losing it had felt like losing herself, that she'd taught herself to be useful because being pleasant wasn't enough to secure her place anywhere. They learned each other's rhythms and quirks, that Thomas was quietest in the mornings and most talkative at night, that Evelyn hummed when she was concentrating, that they both reached for coffee first thing and preferred tea in the evenings. Small intimacies that felt more significant than they should. On the third night, as they were preparing for bed, Maggie asked a question that had clearly been building. Miss Evelyn, are you going to stay forever? The adults exchanged glances over her head. Thomas's expression was carefully neutral, but Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders. Would you like me to stay? Evelyn asked carefully. Yes, very much, yes. You make everything better. The house is happier with you in it. Maggie twisted the edge of her nightgown. But I'm scared you'll leave. That something will happen and you'll go away like Mama did. Evelyn knelt down to Maggie's level. Your Mama didn't choose to leave you, sweetheart. She got sick, and her body couldn't fight anymore. That's not the same as someone choosing to go. But you could choose to go, and then I'd be sad again. I don't have plans to leave, Evelyn said honestly. I'm very happy here with you and your papa, but I also can't promise that nothing will ever change, because life has a way of surprising us. What I can promise is that if anything does change, we'll talk about it honestly. I won't just disappear. Maggie seemed to consider this. Papa, do you want Miss Evelyn to stay? Thomas cleared his throat. Yes, Magpie, I do. Forever and ever? That's a long time, and a big decision. But if you could decide right now, would you want forever? Thomas looked at Evelyn, and she saw everything he couldn't say in front of his daughter written in his eyes. Yes, I think I would. Maggie beamed. Good, then that's settled. Miss Evelyn stays forever, and we're a family, and everyone's happy. Now can we have cocoa before bed? The adults laughed at her 7-year-old certainty that complicated adult situations could be solved so simply. But as they sat around the kitchen table drinking cocoa, Evelyn couldn't help but think that maybe children understood some things better than adults did. Maybe it really could be that simple if they let it be. After Maggie was asleep, Thomas walked Evelyn to her door, a nightly ritual that had developed over the past weeks. Usually they just exchanged good nights, but tonight Thomas lingered. "She puts us on the spot sometimes," he said, "asking questions that deserve careful answers but demanding them right now. She wants certainty, security. Can you blame her after everything she's lost? No, but I can't give her certainty when I don't have it myself." He leaned against the doorframe, his face shadowed in the dim light. "What I said in there about wanting you to stay forever, I meant it. But meaning it and knowing how to make it happen are different things. What's stopping us? From making it real, I mean. Fear, mostly. Fear of making a mistake, fear of dishonoring Sarah's memory, fear of letting Maggie get hurt if this doesn't work out." He paused. "And fear of my own feelings, of caring too much too fast and losing perspective." Evelyn took a small step closer. "I'm afraid too. Afraid of hoping for something and having it taken away again. Afraid of not being enough, of failing at this like I've failed at so many other things. But I'm more afraid of walking away from something real because of what might go wrong. You've never failed at anything here. You've been—" He seemed to struggle for words. "You've been everything I didn't know we needed, everything I didn't let myself hope for. Then why are we holding back? Because hope is dangerous. Because wanting something too much can blind you to reality. Because I have a daughter to think about, and I can't just follow my own desires without considering what's best for her." "And what do you think is best for her?" Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "Honestly, you, having you in her life, teaching her, caring for her, showing her what a strong woman looks like. But I don't know if that means you staying as our hired help or—" He stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. "Or what, Thomas?" He reached out and touched her face, his palm rough and warm against her cheek. "Or something more, something permanent, something that makes you family instead of just someone who works here." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. "What would that look like?" "I don't know. Marriage, I suppose. Making it official, giving you real claim to this place and this life, giving Maggie the mother she keeps asking for. Giving myself permission to feel what I'm feeling without guilt or reservation. And what are you feeling?" His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, like I'm standing on the edge of something terrifying and wonderful. Like I'm betraying Sarah by wanting you and honoring her by not staying frozen in grief. Like I'm a fool for even considering this when you've only been here a few weeks. Like I'd be a bigger fool to let you slip away. Evelyn turned her face into his palm, allowing herself this small intimacy. "I feel the same way. All of it. The terror and the wonder and the impossibility and the rightness of it. So what do? We do what we said. We take it slow. We let it grow naturally. We don't force it to be anything before it's ready." She paused, then added softly, "But we also don't sabotage it by being too afraid to acknowledge what's happening." Thomas's other hand came up to frame her face, and for a moment Evelyn thought he might kiss her. But instead he rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "I'm trying so hard to do this right," he whispered. "To honor everyone. Sarah's memory, Maggie's needs, your dignity, my own heart. But I don't know what right even looks like anymore. Maybe right looks like this. Two people being honest about what they feel and choosing to be brave together." He pulled back slightly to look at her, his gray eyes intense in the lamplight. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. We're the ones making it complicated." He smiled, a sad, tender expression. "When did you get so wise?" "Around the same time I got rejected at a train station and ended up somewhere I never expected. Turns out desperation breeds clarity." Thomas laughed softly, then stepped back, letting his hands fall away from her face. "I should let you sleep. But Evelyn, thank you for understanding, for being patient with me while I figure this out, for not demanding more than I'm ready to give." "I'm not demanding anything, Thomas. I'm just here, offering what I can and hoping it's enough." "It's more than enough. It's everything." He left then, and Evelyn closed her door and leaned against it, her heart full and aching at the same time. Nothing was decided. Nothing was certain. But something was definitely happening, growing in the fertile ground of shared work and honest conversation and careful tenderness. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm passed and the world transformed. Thomas announced at breakfast that he needed to ride into town for supplies, and Maggie immediately begged to go along. "Not this time, Magpie. Roads are still rough from the storm and I need to move fast. You stay here with Miss Evelyn and help with the chores." "But I want to see the snow in town." "There's plenty of snow right here. Besides, someone needs to help Miss Evelyn with the bread." After he left, Maggie was uncharacteristically quiet, picking at her breakfast and staring out the window. Evelyn recognized the mood. The child was worrying about something. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Maggie looked up with troubled eyes. "Do you love my papa?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Evelyn nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Maggie, that's a very personal question." "But do you? Because I think he loves you. He looks at you the way he used to look at Mama. Not exactly the same, but like he's happy when you're there, and I want him to be happy." Evelyn sat down carefully, trying to find words a 7-year-old would understand. "Your papa and I care about each other very much. We're friends, and we work well together, and we both care about you. As for love, that's something that grows slowly, over time. It's not something you can rush or force. But it could grow into love if you gave it time?" "Yes, it could." Maggie nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. "Good, because I want you to be my mama, not instead of my real mama. She'll always be my mama in my heart. But you could be my mama too. Mama number 2. Is that allowed?" Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, sweetheart, that's the loveliest thing anyone's ever said to me." "So you'll think about it? Being my mama number 2? "I'll think about it. But that's also something your papa and I would need to talk about together. It's a big decision. Grown-ups always say things are big decisions, but really they're not that big. Either you want to be a family or you don't. Either you want to stay or you don't. The rest is just details." Out of the mouths of babes, Evelyn thought. Maybe Maggie was right. Maybe they were overthinking something that could be beautifully simple if they let it be. Thomas returned late that afternoon with supplies and news. Gerald Thornton had closed his mercantile and left town abruptly. Rumor had it to return east to find a wife among more refined society. "Good riddance," was Mrs. Brennan's opinion, which he relayed with a slight smile. She said any man too foolish to recognize quality when he saw it deserved to end up alone. "That's harsh," Evelyn said, but she smiled anyway. "Maybe, but not entirely wrong." Thomas set down the last of the supplies. "She also said to tell you that the whole valley's talking about how well you've fitted in here, how natural you look with Maggie, how the ranch seems to run smoother. Said it's like you've always been here. Do you think that's true?" "Yes," he said simply. "I do. You fit here, Evelyn, not because you're trying to, but because you just do." That night, after Maggie was asleep, they sat together on the porch despite the cold. The sky was clear and brilliant with stars, the kind of display that never happened in cities where lamplight drowned out the heavens. "Sarah and I used to do this," Thomas said. "Sit out here and watch the stars. She'd make up stories about the constellations, turn them into adventures for Maggie. I'd just listen and feel grateful for what we had." "I don't want to take her place in your memories, Thomas." "You're not. You couldn't. Sarah was Sarah, and she'll always have that place in my heart." He paused. "But hearts are bigger than we think. There's room for more than one love, more than one chapter. Sarah would be the first to tell me that. She'd probably be frustrated it took me this long to figure it out." Evelyn smiled at that. She sounds like she was wonderfully practical. She was. About everything except her conviction that love was the answer to most problems. She believed in it fiercely, even when it seemed impractical or impossible. He looked at Evelyn. "I think she'd like you. I think she'd be glad her daughter had you to learn from. I hope I'm worthy of that trust." "You are. More than worthy." Thomas reached for her hand in the darkness. Evelyn, I know we said we'd take this slow, but I need to say something, and I need you to hear it without feeling any pressure to respond. All right. I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I already have fallen, I'm not entirely sure, but what I do know is that you've become essential to my life in ways I didn't think were possible anymore. You've made this house a home again, given Maggie something precious, given me hope for the future. And I want... He stopped, gathered himself. I want you to stay. Not as help, as family, as my wife, if you'll have me. Evelyn's breath caught. Thomas, you don't have to answer now. Take all the time you need, but I needed you to know that this isn't just convenience or loneliness talking. This is me, Thomas Hale, asking if you'll share this life with me. Build a future together. Be Maggie's mother and my partner and the person I come home to every single day for the rest of my life. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face, but she was smiling. You're right that I need time. Not to decide, I already know what I want, but to let myself believe this is real. That I'm not dreaming, that someone actually chose me, actually wants me, not despite who I am, but because of it. I choose you, Evelyn. Absolutely and completely. I choose you. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her, and they sat together under the vast star-strewn sky, two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other's company. The future was still uncertain, still fraught with questions and fears and the hard work of blending lives. But in that moment, held safe in Thomas's arms with the promise of tomorrow stretching before them, Evelyn felt something she'd never quite felt before. She felt chosen. She felt home. The morning after Thomas's proposal, Evelyn woke with her heart both lighter and heavier than it had ever been. Lighter because someone had chosen her, had seen her fully and wanted her anyway. Heavier because the weight of that choice meant something profound, something that would alter the course of not just her life, but Maggie's as well. She found Thomas already in the kitchen, as usual, but this morning there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He looked up when she entered, his eyes searching her face. I didn't sleep much, he admitted. Kept worrying I'd pushed too hard, asked too soon, scared you off. Evelyn poured herself coffee and sat across from him. You didn't scare me off, but you did give me a lot to think about. And have you? Thought about it? I've thought about little else. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Thomas, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. All right. Are you asking me to marry you because you love me, or because you need a mother for Maggie and someone to help run the ranch? Because those are different things, and I need to know which one this is. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on hers. That's a fair question, an important one. He leaned forward. When Sarah died, I thought about finding someone practical, someone who could help with Maggie and the work. It made sense logically, but I couldn't do it because it felt like a betrayal, not of Sarah's memory, but of what marriage should be. Sarah and I married for love, and anything less felt like settling. So what changed? You changed everything. You came here as a practical solution, and then you became something else entirely. You became the person I looked for first thing in the morning and the last person I wanted to see before sleep. You became the one I wanted to share small victories with and the one I trusted with my worries. You became essential not because of what you do, but because of who you are. He reached across the table and took her hand. So yes, I need help with Maggie and the ranch, but I'm not asking you to marry me because of that. I'm asking because I love you, because you've brought joy back into this house, because Maggie lights up when you're near, because I can't imagine my future without you in it. The practical benefits are real, but they're not why I want this. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. I needed to hear that, to know I wasn't just filling a convenient gap. You could never be just anything. You're Evelyn, strong and kind and stubborn and brave. You're the woman who got rejected at a train station and somehow found the courage to start over with strangers. You're the person who works until your hands blister and never complains. You're the one who makes my daughter laugh and helps her remember her mother with love instead of just grief. His voice roughened with emotion. You're the woman I'm falling more in love with every single day. I love you too, Evelyn whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. I think I started falling the moment you defended me to Mrs. Thornton, When you saw me as someone worth protecting, worth valuing, but I needed to be sure this was real, that it wasn't just loneliness or convenience dressed up as something more. It's real, Evelyn, as real as anything I've ever felt. She squeezed his hand. Then yes, yes, I'll marry you. I'll be your wife and Maggie's mother and your partner in all of this. Not because I need security, though I won't pretend that doesn't matter, but because I love you and I love her, and I want to build a life here that's truly mine. Thomas stood so quickly his chair scraped against the floor, and then he was pulling her up and into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart racing against her chest. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. You've just made me the happiest man in Colorado, possibly the entire West. Just Colorado? Evelyn teased, her own tears spilling over. All right, the entire country, the whole world. He cupped her face in his hands. May I kiss you? I've wanted to for weeks, but it didn't feel right until... She answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and tenderness and the careful beginning of something precious. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Mama would have liked that. They sprang apart to find Maggie standing in the doorway, grinning from ear to ear. Maggie, how long have you been standing there? Long enough to hear Miss Evelyn say yes, which means she's going to be my mama number 2, right? The child bounced on her toes. This is the best day ever. Thomas and Evelyn exchanged amused glances. You little eavesdropper, Thomas said, but there was no heat in it. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was just being quiet in the hallway. That's different. Maggie rushed forward and threw her arms around both of them. So when's the wedding? Can I have a new dress? Can we have a party? Can we... Slow down, Magpie, Thomas laughed. We just got engaged about 2 minutes ago. Let us catch our breath. But Maggie's enthusiasm was infectious, and soon they were all talking over each other, making plans and dreaming out loud. Evelyn felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove and everything to do with the family she was becoming part of. Later that morning, while Maggie was occupied with her lessons, Thomas brought out a small wooden box from his bedroom. Inside was a simple gold band worn smooth with age. This was my mother's, he said quietly. My father gave it to Sarah when we got married because we couldn't afford a new ring. She wore it until the day she died, and then I put it away because I couldn't bear to see it empty. He took it out, the metal catching the light. I know it's not fancy, and if you want something new, it's perfect, Evelyn interrupted, holding out her hand. It's part of your history, part of this family's story. I'd be honored to wear it. He slid it onto her finger, and though it was slightly loose, it felt right there, like it had been waiting for her all along. We should tell people, Thomas said. Make it official, and we should probably talk to the pastor about when we can have the ceremony. How soon were you thinking? Tomorrow wouldn't be soon enough for me, but I suppose we should give folks time to prepare, and you should have a proper wedding if you want one. Evelyn thought about her cousin's elaborate wedding in Boston, the months of planning and the endless fuss over flowers and fabrics. It had been beautiful and utterly impersonal, more about display than devotion. I don't need fancy, Thomas. I just need real. You, me, Maggie, and whoever else wants to witness us promising our lives to each other. That's enough. His smile was radiant. Then let's do it soon, this month, if the pastor can manage it. I don't want to wait any longer than necessary to make you truly mine. They rode into town that afternoon, all 3 of them, to speak with Pastor Williams. The kindly old minister listened to their story with knowing eyes, occasionally glancing at Maggie, who sat between them looking supremely pleased with herself. So let me see if I understand, he said when Thomas finished explaining. Miss Carter came here to marry Gerald Thornton, who rejected her. You hired her to help with the ranch and your daughter. And now, some 6 weeks later, you wish to marry each other. Put like that, it sounded impulsive and possibly foolish. Evelyn felt her cheeks heat, but Thomas didn't hesitate. Yes, sir, that's the situation. I know it seems fast, but when you know something's right, waiting doesn't make it more right. It just delays the inevitable. Pastor Williams studied them both carefully. Miss Carter, do you love this man? Truly love him? Not just the security he represents? I do, Evelyn said firmly. I love him for his quiet strength, his devotion to his daughter, his honesty even when it's uncomfortable. I love him for seeing value in me when others didn't, And yes, I appreciate the security, but I'd marry him even if he had nothing but debts and dreams. And Mr. Hale, are you certain you're ready for this? Your Sarah's only been gone 2 years. Some might say that's not long enough. Some might say that, Thomas agreed. But Sarah would be the first to tell me that life's too short to waste in mourning what's lost instead of embracing what's found. She'd want Maggie to have a mother, and me to have a partner. And she'd like Evelyn. They're alike in the ways that matter most. The pastor turned to Maggie. And you, young lady, how do you feel about your father marrying Miss Evelyn? I think it's perfect, Maggie declared. Miss Evelyn makes Papa happy, and she makes me happy, and she fits with us like she was always supposed to be here. Plus, she's teaching me to make Mama's recipes, so it's like having parts of Mama still around, but also having something new and good too. Pastor Williams smiled at that. Well, when even the child can articulate such wisdom, who am I to argue? I'll marry you, but I have one condition. What's that? Thomas asked. You come to 3 sessions of counseling with me first. Marriage is hard enough without rushing in blind. I want to make sure you've both thought through the practical realities, talked about expectations, discussed how you'll handle challenges. Can you do that? Yes, sir, they said in unison. Good. Then let's plan for 3 weeks from now. That gives you time for the counseling, time to prepare, and time to make sure this is what you both truly want. If you still feel the same in 3 weeks, I'll happily perform the ceremony. 3 weeks felt like an eternity and no time at all. They fell into a new rhythm, balancing ranch work with wedding preparations and counseling sessions. Pastor Williams proved to be surprisingly thorough, asking hard questions about finances, child-rearing, intimacy, grief, and expectations. What happens when you disagree? He asked during their second session. How will you handle conflict? We talk, Thomas said. That's what Evelyn and I have done from the start. She doesn't let me brood or withdraw. She asks questions and listens and helps me work through things. And if talking doesn't resolve it, then we keep talking until it does, Evelyn said. Neither of us is interested in winning arguments. We're interested in solving problems together. What about children? The pastor asked. Do you want more? Thomas and Evelyn looked at each other. They hadn't discussed this yet. I'd like more, Thomas said slowly. If Evelyn does, but if not, Maggie's enough. She's more than enough. I'd like children, Evelyn admitted. I've always imagined having a family of my own, but I want to make sure Maggie knows she's just as much my daughter as any future children would be, that she's not less important because she didn't come from my body. She'll know, Pastor Williams said gently. Children understand love, and from what I've seen, you love that girl fiercely already. The counseling sessions were harder than Evelyn expected, but also reassuring. Each conversation revealed new layers of compatibility, new ways they complemented each other. Thomas's steadiness balanced her occasional impulsiveness. Her optimism lifted his tendency toward worry. They both valued honesty, hard work, and putting Maggie's needs at the center of their decisions. Meanwhile, the community rallied around them in ways Evelyn hadn't anticipated. Mrs. Brennan organized a quilting bee and made them a wedding quilt. The other ranch wives contributed food for the reception. Even some of the men who'd been skeptical at first came around, offering Thomas quiet congratulations and telling him he'd chosen well. The only shadow came from an unexpected source. 1 week before the wedding, a letter arrived from Evelyn's cousin in Boston. Someone had written to inform her of Evelyn's impending marriage, and the response was scathing. Marrying a widowed rancher you barely know? Have you completely lost your senses? This is even more foolish than the mail-order bride scheme. At least Mr. Thornton had means and refinement. What does this farmer have to offer except hard work and poverty? Come home immediately before you ruin yourself completely. Evelyn read the letter twice, feeling the familiar sting of her cousin's disapproval. But this time, underneath the hurt was something new, anger and certainty. She doesn't understand, Thomas said, reading over her shoulder. She can't imagine choosing love and purpose over comfort and social standing. No, she can't. She married for advantage, and she's been miserable every day since. But she'd rather be miserable in a fine house than happy in a simple one. Evelyn folded the letter carefully. I'm going to write back and tell her I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I choose to do. And that her approval, while it would be nice, isn't necessary for my happiness. That's my brave girl, Thomas said, kissing her temple. Evelyn wrote the letter that evening, choosing her words carefully. She didn't defend her choices because they needed no defense. She simply stated facts, that she loved Thomas and Maggie, that she'd found purpose and belonging, that she was happier than she'd ever been. She thanked her cousin for past hospitality and released her from any further obligation. It was a letter of liberation, severing ties that had always bound without sustaining. The night before the wedding, Mrs. Brennan insisted that Evelyn stay at her house, maintaining the tradition that bride and groom shouldn't see each other before the ceremony. "It's bad luck otherwise," she said firmly, "and you've had enough bad luck in your life. Time for the good kind to take over." So Evelyn found herself in the Brennans' spare room, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She thought about the journey that had brought her here: rejection, humiliation, desperate acceptance of a stranger's offer. Every step had felt like failure at the time, but each one had been necessary to bring her to this moment. There was a soft knock on her door, and Mrs. Brennan entered with a cup of tea. "Couldn't sleep either when it was my wedding eve," she said, settling into the chair by the window. "Too much excitement, too many feelings." "Did you have doubts?" Evelyn asked. "About marrying Mr. Brennan?" "Lord, no. But about whether I'd be a good wife, whether I'd know how to manage a household, whether I was making the right choice? Absolutely. Marriage is terrifying when you really think about it. You're promising your whole life to someone based on feelings that might change." "That's not very reassuring," Mrs. Brennan laughed. "Maybe not, but here's what is. Thomas Hale is one of the best men I know. He loved Sarah truly, and he'll love you the same way. And you're strong enough to build a real partnership with him, not just depend on him. That's rare and precious." "What if I can't fill Sarah's shoes? What if I'm not the mother Maggie needs or the wife Thomas deserves?" "Then you'll stumble and learn and try again, just like every other wife and mother in the world. Nobody's perfect at this, dear. We're all just doing our best and hoping it's enough." She patted Evelyn's hand. "But I've watched you these past weeks. The way you are with Maggie, patient and loving. The way you work alongside Thomas, partners and everything. You're already being exactly what they need. The wedding just makes it official." Evelyn slept better after that conversation and woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through the window. Her wedding day had arrived. The ceremony was simple and beautiful, held in the small church with the whole community in attendance. Evelyn wore a dress that Mrs. Brennan and the other women had altered from one of Sarah's, with Evelyn's blessing. It felt right, wearing something that belonged to the woman who'd loved this family first, carrying forward her legacy while creating something new. Maggie stood beside them, beaming in a new dress, holding a bouquet of late autumn wildflowers. She'd insisted on being part of the ceremony, and Pastor Williams had adapted the traditional vows to include her. "Do you, Thomas Hale, take Evelyn Carter to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and cherish in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Thomas said, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Evelyn Carter, take Thomas Hale to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and cherish in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Evelyn said, her eyes locked on Thomas's face. "And do you both promise to love, guide, and cherish Maggie, to raise her together with patience and wisdom, to show her through your partnership what a loving family looks like?" "We do," they said together. Pastor Williams smiled. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Thomas, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise for the future they'd build together. When they pulled apart, Maggie threw her arms around both of them. "Now we're really a family," she declared, and the congregation laughed with genuine joy. The reception at the ranch was everything Evelyn had never known she wanted. Simple food shared with good people, laughter and music and dancing in the barn. Thomas held her close as they swayed to a fiddle tune, and Evelyn felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. "Happy?" Thomas murmured against her ear. "Happier than I knew was possible." "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." As the sun set and the guests departed, Evelyn found herself standing on the porch with her new family, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. Maggie stood between them, holding both their hands. "I knew it would be like this," the child said contentedly. "From the moment I saw you at the train station, I knew you were supposed to be ours." "Did you really?" Evelyn asked, touched. "Really, truly. You had sad eyes but a kind face, and I thought if we could make your eyes happy instead of sad, that would be good. And look, they're happy now." Thomas and Evelyn looked at each other over their daughter's head, sharing a smile that held all the wonder and gratitude of their unexpected journey. That night, after Maggie was asleep, Thomas and Evelyn sat together in the kitchen that had become theirs, drinking tea and talking about the future. "I want to expand the ranch," Thomas said. "Maybe add some sheep, diversify the income, and I want to save enough to send Maggie to a good school when she's older." "I want to start a garden come spring," Evelyn said. "A proper one, with vegetables and herbs and maybe some flowers. And I'd like to learn to ride better so I can help with more of the ranch work." "I want more mornings like this," Thomas said, reaching for her hand. "More quiet conversations and shared dreams. More of everything that we've found together." "Me too," Evelyn whispered. "All of it. Forever." 3 months later, as winter deepened its hold on the Colorado territory, Evelyn stood at that same kitchen window watching the snow fall. Her hand rested on her stomach where a new life was just beginning to make itself known. She hadn't told Thomas yet, wanted to be certain before raising hopes, but the signs were unmistakable. She thought about the woman she'd been at that train station, broken and rejected, certain her life was over before it had really begun. That woman couldn't have imagined this: a warm home, a loving husband, a daughter who called her mama, and a baby on the way. Couldn't have dreamed that rejection could be the doorway to everything she'd never known she wanted. Thomas came in from the barn, brushing snow from his coat, and his face lit up when he saw her. It always did now, that moment of recognition and joy. He crossed to her and pulled her close, and Evelyn let herself be held, marveling at how safe she felt in these arms. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far I've come. About how being unwanted by Gerald Thornton was the best thing that ever happened to me." Thomas laughed. "Should we send him a thank you letter?" "Absolutely not, but we should thank Maggie. None of this would have happened without her bold invitation." "True. Our daughter has excellent instincts." "Our daughter," Evelyn repeated, loving the sound of it. "Thomas, I have something to tell you." He pulled back to look at her, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. "What is it?" "Nothing bad. Something wonderful, actually. Or I hope you'll think it's wonderful." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby, sometime late summer, I think." For a moment, Thomas just stared at her, his eyes wide. Then his face broke into the most beautiful smile she'd ever seen, and he was lifting her off her feet, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and protested. "We're having a baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Evelyn, we're having a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy? I'm—" He set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "I'm so happy I don't have words for it. Another child. A baby that's ours together. Maggie's going to lose her mind with excitement. Should we tell her now?" "Absolutely. Right now. Tonight. This minute." They woke Maggie gently, and when they told her the news, her reaction was exactly what they'd expected: pure, uninhibited joy. She peppered them with questions about babies and names and whether it would be a brother or sister, her excitement building until she was practically bouncing. "This is the best family ever," she declared. "We have Papa and Mama and me, and soon a baby. We're perfect." Later, after they'd settled Maggie back to sleep and returned to their own room, Thomas held Evelyn close in the darkness. "Do you ever miss Boston?" he asked quietly. "The life you left behind?" Evelyn thought about it honestly. "I miss the idea of it sometimes, the security of knowing exactly where you fit, but I don't miss the reality. I was tolerated there, not treasured, useful but not valued. Here, I matter. My presence makes a difference. I have purpose and love and belonging. That's worth more than all the security and refinement in the world. I'm glad you feel that way, because I can't imagine this life without you in it anymore. You've become essential to everything. You're essential to me too. You and Maggie both. You're my home now." As she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, Evelyn thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. From rejection at a train station to redemption in the arms of a family she'd never expected to find. From being unwanted to being cherished. From being alone to being surrounded by love. The ranch settled into quiet around them, the snow falling soft outside, the fire burning low in the hearth. In her room down the hall, Maggie slept peacefully, dreaming of the baby brother or sister who would join their family. And in the master bedroom,